The Bihar Sanskrit Schools Ordinance case, re-promulgation of ordinances, and its constitutional implications. In the late 1980s, the Bihar government embarked on a legislative journey to take over Sanskrit schools in the state. What started as a temporary ordinance evolved into a constitutional battle, raising critical questions about the limits of executive power and the sanctity of democratic processes. The genesis: Bihar Sanskrit Schools Ordinance, 1989. In 1989, the Bihar government passed the Bihar Non-Government Sanskrit Schools, taking over of management and control, ordinance, aiming to take over the management and control of 429 Sanskrit schools. Transfer the services of teachers and employees of these schools to the state government. Under this ordinance, teachers were effectively granted government employee status. However, the ordinance was never converted into an act. Instead, it was re-promulgated 7 times, a questionable move that bypassed the legislative process. Teachers' petition, claiming government salaries. Teachers of these schools, relying on the ordinance, argued that they had been absorbed as government employees. They filed a writ petition in the Patna High Court demanding 1. Recognition as government employees. 2. Payment of salaries from the government treasury. The legal debate extended beyond salaries to the very validity of the repeated re-promulgation of the ordinance. Patna High Court ruling. The Patna High Court dismissed the teachers' writ petition and ruled that the re-promulgation of the ordinance was unconstitutional. Relying on the Supreme Court's earlier decision in D.C. Wadhwa v. State of Bihar, 1987, the court emphasized: ordinances are temporary measures meant to address emergencies. Re-promulgation without placing the ordinance before the legislature undermines democratic processes. The journey to the Supreme Court. 2-judge bench, 1998. The teachers appealed the High Court's decision to the Supreme Court. The case was heard by a 2-judge bench comprising 1. Justice Sujata Manohar. 2. Justice D.P. Wadhwa. Both judges agreed that the repeated re-promulgation of ordinances was unconstitutional. However, they differed on whether the first ordinance itself was valid. As a result, the matter was referred to a 3-judge bench. 3-judge bench, 1999. The 3-judge bench recognized that the case raised substantial constitutional questions about the executive's power to re-promulgate ordinances. It referred the matter to a 5-judge bench. 5-judge bench, 2004. Given the importance of the issues involved, the 5-judge bench further referred the case to a 7-judge Constitution bench. The 7-judge bench decision, 2017. On January 2, 2017, the 7-judge Constitution bench delivered a landmark judgment addressing the constitutional validity of re-promulgation. Key observations and rulings. 1. Re-promulgation as a fraud on the Constitution. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud***, delivering the majority judgment, declared that the practice of re-promulgating ordinances without legislative approval is a fraud on the Constitution and undermines democratic governance. The court emphasized that ordinances must be placed before the legislature, as mandated by Articles 123(2) and 213(2) of the Constitution. 2. Mandatory legislative oversight. Justice Chandrachud asserted that the requirement to table an ordinance before the legislature is mandatory, not optional. 3. Concurring and divergent views. Justice Madan B. Lokar **** viewed the requirement as directory, not mandatory. Chief Justice T.S. Thakur, in his separate opinion, left open the interpretation of Articles 123(2) and 213(2) regarding the government's obligation to place ordinances before the legislature. Key constitutional principles at stake. 1. Role of ordinances. Ordinances are temporary measures meant to address urgent matters when the legislature is not in session. They cannot substitute for legislative action or be used to bypass parliamentary accountability. 2. Democratic accountability. The executive must remain accountable to the legislature. Re-promulgation without legislative approval undermines this principle. 3. Judicial oversight. The judiciary acts as a guardian of the Constitution, ensuring that executive powers are not misused. The D.C. Wadhwa precedent ****. This case drew heavily from the Supreme Court's decision in D.C. Wadhwa v. State of Bihar, 1987, where the court had held re-promulgation of ordinances is unconstitutional if it bypasses legislative processes. Ordinances are meant for emergencies, not for regular governance. Significance of the 2017 judgment. 1. Strengthening democracy. The judgment reinforced the principle that ordinances must be temporary and subject to legislative scrutiny. 2. Curbing executive overreach. It set a precedent that the executive cannot abuse its ordinance-making power to bypass legislative processes. 3. Protecting constitutional values. The ruling upheld the sanctity of the separation of powers and the accountability of the executive to the legislature. Impact on governance. State governments. The judgment serves as a warning against the misuse of ordinance-making powers. Policy implementation. Encourages governments to rely on legislative processes rather than ordinances for policy making. Judicial precedent. Provides clarity on the constitutional limits of executive power. Takeaways for law students and legal enthusiasts. 1. Understanding ordinances. Ordinances are temporary laws issued by the President, under Article 123, or Governor, under Article 213, when the legislature is not in session. They must be approved by the legislature within 6 weeks of reassembly. 2. Judiciary's role. The judiciary ensures that executive actions adhere to constitutional principles. It plays a vital role in protecting democratic processes and preventing executive overreach. 3. Balance of power. The case highlights the delicate balance between the executive and legislature in a parliamentary democracy. 4. Constitutional interpretation. The judgment showcases how constitutional provisions like Articles 123 and 213 are interpreted to uphold democratic values.